Let's look at how we might tackle a difficult RAW file in Affinity Photo. So here is my RAW file. Just a side note, when you open up RAW files, you are taken straight to the Develop persona. This is a dedicated workspace for RAW development. And when you develop the RAW file, you then move back to the main Photo persona, which is where you do the majority of your image editing. Okay, so there are a couple of things to note with this image. One is the foreground is severely underexposed, simply because I was trying to capture as much highlight detail as possible in the sun. So we're going to have to boost the shadow tones, but when we do, we're also going to have to tackle some noise. The second thing is that we have some lens distortion here. Okay, this is a photo from a drone, and we don't actually have a lens correction profile for this particular model. So we're just going to have to adjust it manually, and I'll show you how to do that as well. Let's look at the foreground first then. So I'll enable shadows and highlights. I'm just going to bring the highlights down until we get as much usable detail from the sun as possible. Then I will bring the shadows slider up to boost the foreground. Just to note that it's very easy to go too far with the shadows slider, and then the whole image looks very unnatural. So just be careful about how much you boost the shadow tones by. I think I'll stick to about 40% for now. Okay, next let's look at the colours. So I'll just increase the saturation slightly. Then I'll enable the white balance option, and I feel this image is slightly too cool for my taste, so I'll just warm the image up slightly by dragging the temperature slider. Okay, now the other thing that we can notice is that because we've boosted the foreground detail here, everything tends to look quite flat and it doesn't really jump out at you. To counteract that, we can increase clarity. So clarity enhances mid-tone contrast. And you can see here we're starting to add some contrast in between all of these individual areas. Much like the shadow slider, however, it is possible to go way too far with the setting. So again, just take a step back and evaluate how much you actually want to add to your image. Okay, let's tackle the lens distortion. So to do this, we can move across to the lens panel. And we have this distortion slider here. Rather than drag on the slider, we can also click these little icons to adjust it incrementally. So for example, I can just bring the distortion down to about -12. Then I need to scale up the image to get rid of the alpha transparent areas. So I can just increase the scale like so until those areas disappear. And we don't have to commit to any particular value. For example, I could experiment further with the distortion. In fact, I think I will reduce it to about -10. Okay, I'm happy with that. So that's the lens distortion corrected. But now, if I just zoom in to 300%, you'll notice we have the noise. So again, we can tackle this very quickly by moving across to the Details panel. And we already performed some color noise reduction by default, so you don't particularly have to worry about chrominance noise. However, we have luminance noise remaining, and I'll just actually zoom in even further so we can see it in more detail. So I can just start to bring this slider up, and we start to knock out the luminance noise. So let's just find a nice balance, like so. And if we want to have more detail, we can just increase luminance details. So if we're finding the image gets a little bit soft, just experiment with the balance between the overall reduction and the details slider. Okay, I'm happy with that, so I will zoom back out to fit. And then I'm going to move across to the tones panel. So let's say overall I'm happy with this. But if you wanted to take it a step further and flatten out your image, perhaps to do more tonal work when you move to the main photo persona, you can use your own tonal curve. So I'm going to just drag out a node here to boost all of the shadow and midtones then I'm going to drag this node here to bring back some of the highlight detail. And again, I'm just going to sort of fine-tune this until I end up with a flatter result. And at any point, if you decide you don't like a particular adjustment, rather than have to reset it, you can just simply disable it, like so. So once we're happy with all of the adjustments we've made, in fact, I'll just increase my brightness, like so, we can click Develop, and we will then develop that raw file, committing all of those adjustments we have just made, and we'll move to the main photo persona, which is where we then have access to our main image editing functionality like adjustment layers, live filter layers, and of course all of our tools on the left-hand side. So there we go, just a slightly more in-depth look at raw editing.